to the ranch, and he is surprised by what happens next. It was a fading afternoon on Tomas Herrera's ranch when he heard the desperate scratching at the front door of his cabin. At first he thought it was the desert wind, but the sounds grew louder, more urgent. As he opened the door, rifle in hand, he was paralyzed by what he saw. 3 wounded wolves lay on the wooden porch, their trembling bodies marked by deep wounds and dried blood. The largest, clearly the male of the pack, had a hind leg shattered by a steel trap still hanging from its limb. The female panted heavily, her cuts looking like knives, while a small cub took refuge among them, its yellow eyes filled with terror and pleading. What struck Thomas most was not just the pitiful state of the animals, but the way they looked at him. There was no aggression in their eyes, none of the feral instincts he would expect from wounded wolves. Instead, there was something almost human, a desperate plea, as if they understood that this gray-bearded, kind-hearted man was their only hope for survival. The male wolf, summoning his last bit of strength, dragged his mutilated leg and extended his snout toward Thomas, as if begging him to let them in. It was a heartbreaking sight, a family of wolves seeking shelter from the very natural enemy their entire species had learned to fear. Thomas had seen much cruelty in his 40 years of living in the wilderness, but this scene stirred in him an outrage he had never felt before. Someone had tortured these creatures out of pure evil, and now they had come seeking the one thing they had left, the compassion of a stranger. As we discover this extraordinary tale together, I love knowing that our stories travel all over the world. If you're enjoying this far, a short comment telling us from which city you're listening would fill us with joy. It's wonderful to know how far these adventures of the Old West that we love so much reach. Now, join me as we discover what happened when Tomas Herrera opened his heart and his home to these unexpected visitors. Without a second's hesitation, Tomas put his rifle aside and knelt down next to the 3 wounded wolves. "Come in, boys," he whispered in a voice he had never used to talk to wild animals. "You're safe here." To his astonishment, the wolves seemed to understand his words perfectly. The male, painfully dragging his injured leg, was the first to cross the threshold, followed by the female who delicately carried the cub in her snout. Once inside the warm cabin, the 3 animals huddled together by the fireplace as if they knew exactly where they were supposed to be. Thomas closed the door and lit more logs on the fire. The golden light of the flames completely illuminated the wounds of his unexpected guests, and what he saw filled him with a silent but devastating fury. The steel trap on the male's leg had been designed not only to capture, but to inflict the maximum possible suffering. The metal teeth had pierced muscle and bone, and due to the infection that was evident, it had been there for days. The cuts on the female were precise, deliberate, made by someone who enjoyed the pain of others. And the cub, in addition to being malnourished, had small burns on its fur. Quote, "They didn't do this to hunt them," Thomas muttered as he prepared warm water and bandages. "They did this for fun." He worked all night long, healing the wounds. First, he freed the male's leg from the trap, a delicate operation that the animal endured without a single whimper, as if it understood that Thomas was there to help him. Then he cleaned and bandaged the cuts on the female, who licked his hand in gratitude. Finally, he fed the cub warm milk and wrapped it in a blanket. What surprised him most was the way these wild animals behaved in his home. They didn't knock anything over, they didn't make a mess, they didn't show any signs of aggression. It was as if a family of polite people had come to ask for shelter. When dawn painted the windows of the cabin orange, Thomas fell asleep in his chair by the fireplace. When he woke up 3 hours later, he found something that left him speechless. The cub slept curled up in his lap, while its parents stood guard over him at the door, as if protecting both their cub and their savior. But what Tomas didn't know was that in the nearby town's tavern, 3 brothers known for their cruelty had already noticed the absence of their favored toys and were planning to get their victims back at any cost. The next few days passed as if Tomas had gained a whole new family. The wolves were not only recovering physically, but they were displaying an intelligence and loyalty that defied everything he thought he knew about wild animals. The male wolf, whom Tomas had begun to call guardian because of the way he protected his family, had learned to walk with his leg bandaged and always position himself between the door and the rest of the pap. The female, whom he named Hope because of the light she had brought to his solitary life, followed him around the house like a protective shadow. And the little one, named Valor because of his incredible resilience, had begun to play and run around the ranch as if he had been born there. But the most extraordinary thing was how they responded to Tomas's daily routines. When he would go out to feed the cows, his guardian limping but steady, helping to keep the herd in order. Esperanza had begun hunting mice in the barn, keeping the supplies safe, and Balor simply brought joy with his innocent antics. A week after their arrival, as Tomas was repairing a broken fence, he heard the sound of horses approaching. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, and his heart sank as he recognized the sinister silhouettes. The Alina's brothers, Victor, Diego, and Ricardo, known throughout 3 counties for their cruelty to animals and their illegal fur trade. They wore hats adorned with the teeth and claws of the beasts they had tortured, and their faces showed the kind of wickedness that only comes from years of inflicting suffering without remorse. "Herrera," shouted Victor, the eldest of the 3. "We know you have something that belongs to us." Tomas dropped his hammer and strode toward them, but out of the corner of his eye he saw something that surprised him. 3 logos had emerged from the cabin and positioned themselves strategically around the ranch. Guardian was near the front door. Hope had moved toward the barn and little Valor had hidden behind a barrel, all in positions that would allow them to defend their territory if necessary. "There's nothing on my ranch that belongs to you," Tomas replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. Diego Salinas spat on the ground and pointed toward the cabin. "Those 3 wolves you have there are ours. We trained them for weeks before they disappeared." "Training?" Tomas's voice was filled with contempt. "That's what you call torture." Ricardo laughed a laugh that made even the horses shiver. "Wild animals need to learn who's boss, and we're very good teachers." "Well, here they're going to learn who's really in charge," Tomas replied, slowly approaching his rifle that he had left leaning against a post. Victor noticed the movement and his hand moved to his revolver. "Watch out, Herrera, there are 3 of us against 1. "You are mistaken," said a quiet but determined voice. The 3 brothers looked on in confusion until they realized that Tomas was not alone. The 3 wolves had emerged from their positions and were standing next to him, forming a defensive line. Guardian, despite his injured leg, bared his fangs in a ferocious grin. Esperanza's fur was standing on end and her eyes were fixed on the intruders. Even the little Valor growled with an intensity that did not correspond to his size. "It's 3 against 4, Tomas continued. "And I assure you that my friends here have more reasons to fight than you do." The Salinas brothers exchanged nervous glances. They had come expecting to find a lone cowboy with 3 wounded and frightened wolves. Instead, they found something they had never seen before, an alliance between man and beast forged in mutual respect and love. "This is not going to stop there, Herrera," Victor growled as he backed his horse. "We will return with more men. We will be waiting," he replied. Tomas kept his eyes fixed on the three riders as they rode away. That night, as the four friends shared dinner by the fireplace, Tomas couldn't get the threat of the Alinas out of his mind. But when he looked into the determined eyes of his fellow wolves, he knew that together they would face any danger that came. What he didn't know was that the Alinas brothers were already recruiting gunmen from the worst dens in the territory, and that they had put a price on the heads of Tomas and his three protectors. The days that followed were filled with tense calm on the ranch. Tomas maintained his routines, but always with one eye on the horizon and his weapons within reach. His fellow wolves seemed to sense the tension in the air. Guardian had begun patrolling the perimeter of the ranch every night. Esperanza remained ever vigilant during the day, and even little Valor had developed the habit of growling softly when he sensed something strange. What surprised Tomas the most was how these animals had transformed not only his daily routine, but his lonely heart. For 24 years he had lived alone, convinced that solitude was safer than company. But now waking up each morning to see three pairs of golden eyes waiting for him with joy had given him a purpose he hadn't known he needed. "You know what, boys?" he said to them one afternoon as they watched the sunset from the porch. "I think you rescued me more than I rescued you." Keeper came over and rested his big head in Thomas's lap, a gesture of affection that had become routine between them. Hope lay down at his feet and Valor nestled against his leg. He was a picture of perfect peace that contrasted dramatically with the approaching storm. On the 7th day, his fears were confirmed. Thomas was repairing the roof of the barn when Keeper began to howl, the long, low sound that made his blood run cold. It wasn't a howl of pain or a call, it was a warning. On the horizon, a cloud of dust was approaching fast. There weren't three of them, riders this time. Tomas counted at least 12 figures, all armed, all with the clear intention of finishing what the Salinas brothers had started. "Last chance, Herrera," shouted Victor Salinas. "Give us the wolves and get out of the territory, or we will burn your ranch with everything inside." Tomas stepped forward flanked by his three companions. The image was impressive. A man with gray hair flowing in the wind, holding a rifle in steady hands, accompanied by three wolves who looked at him as if he were their pack leader. "My answer remains the same," Tomas shouted back. "Cruelty has no place in this land. If they want pairs, they will have them." "Then let it be a massacre," roared Ricardo Salinas, spurring his horse. The 12 riders charged toward the ranch. Their weapons gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the ground shook under the gallop of 24 hooves. But what happened in the next few minutes would challenge everything these cruel men thought they knew about loyalty, courage, and the power of a family united by something stronger than blood. Tomas took cover behind a water barrel and opened fire with the precision of a veteran, but his eyes filled with pride and awe as he watched his fellow wolves spring into action. They did not fight like wild animals, they fought like trained soldiers. Guardian began to run in zigzags, the most unsteady pace he could find, dodging bullets with impressive agility. The battle that followed would become legend throughout the region. Tomas fired with the deadly precision of a sniper, but his three fellow wolves displayed a coordination and bravery that no human soldier could have imagined. Outclassed, Guardian, despite his injured leg, moved like a gray shadow among the horses, using his weight and cunning to bring down riders. His tactics were perfect. He would approach the horse's blind side, leaped to reach the rider's legs and bring them down so Tomas could finish the job. Esperanza had developed an even cleverer strategy. She would run in zigzags between the horse's legs, biting their tendons just enough to make them rear but not seriously injure them. Her goal was not to hurt the innocent animals, but to neutralize their evil riders. Even the small value contributed to the battle in extraordinary ways. The size allowed him to squeeze into impossible spaces, distracting the attackers at crucial moments and giving Tomas the opportunities he needed to shoot. The first volley of the battle lasted 15 minutes that felt like hours. When the smoke began to clear, 4 of the gunmen lay motionless on the desert floor and 3 more were wounded and retreating. But the Salinas brothers continued fighting with the desperation of men who knew this was their last chance. "Damn animals!" shouted Diego Salinas as he tried to aim at Esperanza. "They're just beasts, they're wrong," replied Tomas as he reloaded his rifle. "They're family." Victor Salinas, furious at seeing his men defeated by a cowboy and 3 wolves, decided to gamble everything on one final card. He spurred his horse and headed straight for Tomas with a knife in his hand, screaming like a demon. What happened next was so fast that some later witnesses would call it a miracle. Guardian, seeing the danger approaching his human protector, gathered all his strength and stood between Victor and Tomas. The attacker's knife sank into the wolf's noble chest, but not before its powerful jaws closed around the neck of Victor Salinas, ending the life of the cruelest man in the region. "No, Guardian," Tomas shouted, running toward his wounded friend. The other attackers, seeing their leader dead and realizing that they were fighting something beyond their comprehension, threw down their weapons and fled into the desert, knowing that they would never terrorize the innocent again. Thomas knelt beside Guardian, who was breathing heavily but kept his golden eyes fixed on his human friends, and hope and courage came to him. He groaned with a sound that tore at his heart. "Easy, my friend," Thomas whispered through tears he hadn't shed in decades. "You did it. You stopped them. They won't hurt anyone else." Guardian lifted his great head one last time and licked Thomas's hand as if to tell him that it had all been worth it. In his eyes was peace, pride, and a love so pure that it transcended the barriers between species. With a final sigh, the brave wolf closed his eyes forever, having fulfilled his purpose of protecting the family he had chosen. Hope howled with a sound that echoed across the desert, a wail that touched the heart of every living creature for miles around. Valor curled up against the still body of her protective father. And Tomas Herrera, the lone cowboy who had opened his heart to 3 strangers, wept as he had not wept since he was a boy, knowing that he had lost not just a comrade, but a true hero. The days that followed the battle were filled with mourning on the small ranch. Tomas built a solid stone tombstone with the words Guardian, Hero, and True Friend. And each dawn, he, Hope, and Valor visited the grave to pay homage to the brave wolf who had given his life to protect his chosen family. Esperanza had changed since her mate's death. She was no longer just a grateful she-wolf. She had become Tomas' protector, following him everywhere with a loyalty that bordered on the supernatural. Courage, for his part, had matured extraordinarily, as if the loss of his father had taught him the true meaning of responsibility and honor. But the sadness began to transform into something unexpected when visitors began to arrive at the ranch. The first was Don Miguel Hernandez, the most respected rancher in the region, who arrived with his hat in his hand and respect in his eyes. As Tomas dismounted from his horse, he said to him, "The whole region has heard what you did. How did you fight alongside those wolves against the Olinas? How did you defend the innocent when no one else dared?" Then the entire Rodriguez family arrived with supplies and offers of help. Then came the Thompson brothers, who had suffered abuse at the hands of the Olinas for years. By the end of the week, a steady stream of visitors had turned the ranch into a place of pilgrimage for all the decent people of the region. "I never thought I would see the day when the Salinas were defeated," confessed Mrs. Carmen Vasquez, a widow who had lost her husband at the hands of the cruel brothers. "Your bravery has given us hope back." What moved Tomas most was seeing how people reacted to hope and courage. Instead of the fear he would expect toward wild wolves, they showed respect and affection, as if they understood that these animals were just as much heroes as their human companions. The children especially were drawn to Valor, who had developed an infinite patience with the little ones, allowing them to play with him and pet him as if he were the most docile dog in the world. "It's extraordinary," Don Miguel commented as he watched his 5-year-old granddaughter running bravely across the meadow. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if these animals understood that their purpose is to protect and love." But the most surprising visit came on the 10th day after the battle. An elegant man dressed in a black suit and top hat showed up at the ranch riding a thoroughbred horse. His business card read, U.S. Magistrate Judge Samuel Morrison, Arizona Territory. "Mr. Herrera," the judge said in a formal but respectful voice, "I have ridden all the way from the capital to meet you personally." Thomas, who was not used to official visits, welcomed the judge into his modest cabin with hope and courage, flanking him as always. His story has reached the highest offices in the territory. Judge Morrison continued, "What you did here, the way you stood up for justice when the authorities failed, has impressed many important people." The judge pulled an official document from his leather briefcase. "The governor of the territory has authorized me to offer you the position of sheriff of Sonora County. It is a position of great responsibility and honor." Thomas looked at the document, then at Esperanza, who had rested her head in his lap, and finally at Valor, who was sleeping by the fireplace. "It is an honor, Judge Morrison, but I must respectfully decline." "May I ask why?" "The salary is excellent. I would have authority over 3 counties, and my place is here," Thomas interrupted softly, stroking Esperanza's fur with my family. The judge followed Thomas's gaze to the 2 wolves, and a smile spread across his serious face. "I understand perfectly," he said, putting the document away. "But if he ever changes his mind, the offer will still be open." That night, after the judge left, Tomas sat on the porch with hope and courage, looking up at the stars shining brightly over his little corner of the world. "You know what, my friends?" he said softly. "I think we already have everything we need here." But what Tomas didn't know was that his decision to stay on the ranch would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. 6 months had passed since the great battle, and Tomas Herrera's ranch had become something unique in all of Arizona. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of hope, a place where people knew that justice and compassion still existed in the world. Esperanza had given birth to a litter of 4 beautiful puppies who combined intelligence with guardian nobility. The little ones had grown up surrounded by love, not only from their mother and courage, but from the entire community that visited the ranch regularly. Tomas had developed a special routine with his extended family. Every morning, he would come to see them. They visited the guardian's grave together, where the cubs had learned to sit quietly while he told them stories of the hero they had never met, but whose bravery ran through his veins. Their father, Tomas would tell them as he stroked their little gray heads, was the bravest wolf who ever lived. He taught them that true courage was not being fearless, but doing the right thing in spite of fear. The ranch had become a must-see stop for travelers from all over the region. Traders, settler families, and even government delegations came to meet the man who had fought alongside wolves and changed the history of the territory. But the most important visit came one spring day when a wagon train pulled up in front of the ranch. Out of it came a family that Tomas had not seen in years: his sister Maria, his brother-in-law Alberto, and his 3 young nephews. "Tomas," Maria said with tears in her eyes, "we have traveled halfway across the country to see you. Stories of your bravery have reached all the way to California." The family reunion was emotional, but it was a joy to see. What surprised Maria the most was seeing how her brother, who had always been solitary and bitter, had transformed into a man full of peace and purpose. "How did you do it?" she asked that night as she watched Tomas play with the puppies in the yard. "You were always so distant." Tomas looked over to where Esperanza patiently watched over her cubs and where Valor taught the little ones to catch mice. "They taught me something I didn't know," he replied with a smile. "They taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, and that when you have something worth fighting for, you become someone worth being." Tomas's nephews instantly fell in love with the wolves, especially the smallest of the puppies, whom they had named Little Guardian in honor of their heroic grandfather. "Can I have Little Guardian? I promise to take care of him like you took care of his mom and dad." Thomas looked at Esperanza, who came closer and sniffed the boy carefully. After a moment, the mother wolf sat down and placed her paw on the little boy's hand, as if to give her approval. "I think Esperanza has already made up her mind," Thomas said, laughing, "but you have to promise me something. You'll treat him not like a pet, but like a member of the family." I promise," the boy shouted, hugging the pup he had already adopted as his human brother. 3 years later, Thomas Herrera's ranch was known throughout Arizona as the Guardian's Refuge, a place where people could find justice, compassion, and hope. Thomas had turned down multiple offers of government positions, preferring to remain an ordinary citizen, protecting his community from his small corner of the desert. Esperanza had trained her pups to be as noble and brave as their father. 2 of them had remained on the ranch as guardians. One had gone with Maria's family to California, and the 4th had been adopted by Don Miguel Hernandez, becoming the most intelligent shepherd dog in the region. Balor, now fully grown, had become Tomas's lieutenant, accompanying him on all his activities and serving as an ambassador between the human and wild worlds. On starry desert nights, when the wind whispered stories of the past among the cacti, travelers would say they could hear howls of joy coming from Tomas Herrera's ranch. They were the howls of a family that had proven that true love knows no species, that loyalty cannot be bought with gold, and that sometimes angels come in ways we never expected. And when people asked about the secret of Tomas's transformation, he always answered the same, looking toward the grave under the oak tree where his first wolf friend rested. "Guardian taught me that true courage is not in not being afraid, but in doing the right thing despite fear. Esperanza showed me that love can heal any wound, and Valor showed me that joy can be found in the simplest moments of every day." The years passed, and the legend of the cowboy and the wolves spread throughout the American wilderness. But for Tomas, the most important thing wasn't fame. It was the mornings when he woke up surrounded by his chosen family, knowing that he had found his place in the world. Every evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, Tomas would sit on the same porch where it all began. Beside him, Esperanza watched over her puppies playing in the meadow, while valor stood guard with the dignity of a veteran general. And there, in that small corner of the Arizona desert, a solitary man had learned that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, and that true love always finds a way to reach us, even when it appears in ways we never imagined. Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If this story of the brave Tomas Herrera and his fellow wolves has moved you as much as it has us, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more extraordinary stories from the Old West. Would you like to hear more adventures like this? Let us know in the comments from which city you are watching us and what was your favorite part of the story of guardian hope and courage. Activate the bell so you don't miss any of our future stories. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear about the power of love and loyalty. See you in the next adventure where we will discover more secrets and legends of the Wild West. Say,